we have to move forward. You asked me at one point, how do we stay engaged? We do have to wake up tomorrow and do something. So our options are accepting somebody else dictating our lives to us, or insisting on retaining our agency and trying to make the world a better place. And given those two options, I think of listen, nobody wants to face what we're coming up to, but what are our options to do anything other than trying to make it better?
And welcome to the PoliticsGirl podcast. I'm your host, Lee McGowan. Let's get into it. Today, I'm very happy to be joined by my friend Heather Cox Richardson, the absolutely brilliant writer and intellect and author of the wildly successful Substack, Letters from an American. The author of 7 books on history and politics, Heather is a historian and professor of American history at Boston College, having previously taught at MIT and the University of Massachusetts Amherst. Since we're at the start of a new year, a new quarter century, and a new administration, a lot is up in the air. So I thought I would take this opportunity to chat with one of the smartest people I know about what's going on to see where she thinks America stands in the course of history. Now, there are no answers right now about how it's going to be or how you think things are going to go. But I think if you're paying attention, we know it's not going to be great. But the question is, what do we do with that information? And how do we stay informed without losing our minds? So without further ado, please welcome someone I hope has insight on that question, my guest, historian, author, and professor, Heather Cox Richardson. Welcome back, Heather.
Thanks for having me. It's a real pleasure.
Well, thank you for coming. As I was just saying in the introduction, we don't know exactly how it's going to be moving forward or how things are going to look in the coming months and years under this new administration. But I think we can safely assume it's not going to be good. The question is, what do we do with that knowledge, right? How do we continue to stay informed without losing our minds?
So I'm going to throw that back at you and say, I don't think we can assume it's not going to be good because as a historian, I will tell you, we don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. We don't know what's going to happen in an hour from now. And I think that you never know what could happen. My example of that lately is if you had asked most people who were paying close attention to foreign affairs what was going to be the most important thing going forward from 2024 to 2025, how many of them would have said that Bashar al-Assad would be removed from power in Syria, which was a game changer. And so now you can't really say, oh, we can assume what's going to happen going forward because we just don't know. That being said, we do know a number of things. And one of them is that the incoming administration, the Republicans have control of the House, the Senate, the White House, and the Supreme Court. And they have adhered to really regressive policies that will, for example, cut taxes for the very wealthy and corporations and cut regulations that have managed to make businesses be fairer to workers and to consumers. They have talked about getting rid of the basic social safety net. They want to stop infrastructure. They want to stop protecting civil rights. The past certainly indicates going forward is going to be a problem. And what I would say is that one of the things I've already noticed about the Trump people is they're throwing complete confusion at us all the time. And it's designed to make us exhausted. And one of the things I would say is do not follow every little twist and turn because it's designed to make you tune out because you get so overwhelmed. Recognize that there are larger patterns to watch, but you do not have to follow every last tweet or post or whatever they are on Truth Social, because a lot of that is simply noise designed to get people agitated the same way a professional wrestler's script would do.
I actually think that's a good analogy, professional wrestler, because we do have one of the McMahons, I think, that's been suggested for a cabinet position. But I think that a lot of how Donald Trump runs his organization, his political party, whatever it is a lot like entertainment wrestling and a lot like WWE. It's like, these are the big, villains. These are the big winners, like it's all a show. And we as Americans, I think, fall very deeply into wanting to be entertained. And I think that you're right. This constant doom scrolling that we've all taught ourselves to do is not going to help us when it's coming at us like a fire hose.
Yeah, and there's a really interesting way to look at the whole professional wrestling angle of what Donald Trump, and you're thinking of Linda McMahon, who's
That's
really
right.
interesting. There's Vince and Linda McMahon, and they're really important in professional wrestling because what they did is they took what was, kind of a dying industry in the 1980s that circled around something called Kayfabe, which was the fact that everybody pretended as if professional wrestling was real, even though everybody knew it wasn't. That was sort of the joke at the heart of it, or the game at the heart of it. And what they did is they first of all stopped pretending it was a real sport and said instead it's going to be classified as entertainment, because then they didn't have to worry about the taxes that sporting events have to pay, and they didn't have to worry about some of the protections for the people engaging in it.
And this is when we went from WWF to WWE.
Yeah,
so
that
from the
happens
federation to entertainment. Okay.
That's right. And then what they did, which I think is really reflective of politics in America today, is they began to mix real life and that kayfabe into something that a scholar of it calls neo-kayfabe, in which you never quite know what's real and what's not. So you're constantly looking to see if there's a pattern, to see if there's something new, to see if that's a reflection of real life. And it reminds me a lot of the way people engage with conspiracy theories, or as they did with QAnon, or do with QAnon. Is that a sign or is it not a sign? And you can see it, I think, in the modern period in the last few days with the man who drove a Tesla Cybertruck to a Trump tower and then apparently died by suicide, and then the thing exploded. And so many people are like, is this a sign? Is it not a sign? Is he signaling to somebody? Is he not signaling to someone? We don't know.
Is it just a metaphor for what we're going to have coming forward? A burning Tesla in front of a Trump hotel.
Exactly. And the lightning hitting the Capitol building, I forget which day it was, but everyone's like, ooh, it's a sign. It's like, yeah, it's a sign that lightning tends to hit things that are high off the ground, but people wanted to see a meaning in that.
Yeah, I think that's why, there's so much religious imagery, so much tied to the Christian nationalist movement. Like, people are looking for signs. They're looking for a bigger picture. They're looking for meaning within their own struggles. And I think you can use it against people if you are clever enough.
Yes, and I think what you just touched on there is really important, that people look for signs and the idea that the universe actually has meaning, individual meaning for them in situations where they don't feel like they're in control of their lives. And one of the things that I really like to emphasize about this moment is in the United States of America in 2025, we have extraordinary power as individuals. We have agency to affect our world. And I always like to compare that to this scene from the Puritans, who were the people who settled in European North America after the Pilgrims. And they were intensely religious people, and they believed that the Bible had patterns in it and that God would follow those patterns. So if you saw something happen, you could immediately make analogies to things that had happened largely in the Old Testament. And they're literally fighting as a community at one point in a church, and it's hot and the door is open. And while they are sitting there fighting, trying to decide what the community is going to do, a snake comes into the aisle and it turns toward one side and away from the other side. And they're like, that's it. God has spoken. And now we know we have to go that way. We don't have to live that way in 2025.
Yeah. But I think that the snake does speak a lot in 2025. And I think a lot of people are like, well, the snake has spoken. I think one of my concerns with when I tell you like what happens with Project 2025 or something like this, when I say I can assume it won't be good, and you're saying don't make assumptions, we don't know how that's going to be. But if I look and read something like Project 2025, and I know what the Christian nationalist ideas are, and I know how they want to rule, and I know how organized they are. Like, Trump himself might be a disorganized person who's surrounding himself with billionaires and yes men, but the Project 2025 people who really have JD Vance under their power, they have a full plan and a full way to get things accomplished. And it'll be very hard to roll back their problems. I think sometimes I wonder if we won't be better off if these people fight each other. Do you think that that's going to happen? Because the Republican factions already seem to be fighting with each other. Steve Bannon versus Elon and Vivek regarding the necessity for H-1B visas, or Laura Loomer versus Elon over who controls MAGA. What's your take on these internal conflicts? Because sometimes I think that might be our only shot.
Well, and that's actually a really good point that you brought up. When I say we can't assume everything's going to be bad, I do think we have reason to believe that people are going to get hurt. I mean, that's the
Yeah.
whole point here. And Trump was elected with the idea he would hurt people, and he's going to try to hurt people. But the other side of it is exactly what you identified, that there is enormous infighting already among the Republicans who did not win 50% of the vote. More people voted for somebody other than Donald Trump than voted for him. And in the down ballot races, the Republicans did not do well, who have razor thin majorities in the House and the Senate, and who have the real problem of the fact that Donald Trump promised contradictory things to different groups of people. You can't both increase immigration, as Elon Musk and what people are calling the doggy faction want, and cut immigration as MAGA Republicans want. You simply can't do both of those things at once. You can't protect the right for states to decide about abortion within their borders and push through a national abortion ban. He has promised both to different factions. So, and I think as Josh Marshall pointed out in Talking Points memo, Trump doesn't care. He wanted not to go to prison. That's why he ran to become president. He doesn't care how any of this comes out. He's already accomplished what he wanted. He's 78 years old. He just wants to be on the golf course and eating food at Mar-a-Lago, right? So there is going to be extraordinary confusion among the Republican Party, and there's significant places where Republicans will push back on Trump. So, for example, the Wall Street Journal did an interview with a bunch of CEOs earlier in December in which they said, "What do you want?" And literally the first two things they said were, "We don't want tariffs, except as they are targeted the way Biden did them. And we don't want mass deportations."
Because it's bad for the economy. It's terrible for the economy. And they know that. The question is, how upset will the base be if they don't get what they want? I heard recently, and I don't know if it's true, I hope it's true, that the Democrats were thinking of putting together single issue bills based on all of Trump's promises. So it's we're going to give you a better health plan, and then they put it together and they say, okay, give us the thing you said they would, and make the Republicans vote against it over and over again, all of their promises at once, but as single issue bills to point out. And I thought that might be interesting because I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed. I mean, I saw an interview you did recently on PBS, and you were talking about election results where the majority of Americans were voting because they were saying they were unhappy with higher prices or they were unhappy with the economy post-COVID. But what they're going to get is something completely different than what they voted for. You're saying, the economists are like, don't do this tariffs thing. It's going to make everything more expensive. So if you voted for the cost of eggs and then everything goes up in price, you're going to be like, hold on, wait a second. And you were pointing out on PBS that the people who paid no attention to political news went 19 points for Donald Trump. But the people who were truly informed about the economy and crime and things like that went 2-1 for VP Harris. So what do we do about that? Because it seems like the uninformed swayed this election. And being truly informed is not going to get any better under Trump. It's only going to get worse.
Well, maybe, or maybe it's
again, stop making assumptions, Lee.
Well, I think that that's exactly what happened in the 2024 election, is that people thought, and by people, I mean people like me, people who were in the Biden administration, I assume people like you, thought that if we did a lot of interviews and if we told people that the government really was working, that numbers of people who were being able to unionize had gone up, that real wages were the highest they'd been since the 1960s, that the economy was the strongest by 2 times than any other country in the G7. I mean, I could keep on going down the list, that they would say, oh yeah, COVID was a problem, but we came out of it better than anybody else thanks to having competent people in office. But what we learned was that the Trump Republicans, who I always like to emphasize are not traditional Republicans, they're not true Republicans, had built an alternative media. And it was an alternative media that didn't engage with legacy media, because if you watched legacy media or read the legacy newspapers, including the Wall Street Journal, which has a very right-leaning editorial page, you voted for Kamala Harris. If you watched the Fox News channel or anything within that right-wing media ecosphere, you went 19 points, between 3 and 19 points for Donald Trump. And if you lived in a news desert, where you didn't have access to any newspapers or any news really at all, you went as much as 54 points for Donald Trump. So I think the real message going forward for people who want a reality-based government again. And by this, I don't mean necessarily Democrats or independents, but Democrats, independents, and Republicans who want to live in a reality-based community need to make sure that we create a reality-based ecosystem, and I would include people like the Bulwark in this, who are true conservatives, a reality-based ecosystem that reaches into these news deserts. And I see it happening. Again, I look at you and me. We weren't doing this in 2016.
No, it's true. I just think, I think that people are very misinformed. They're already misinformed. They're spun up on lies. They're spun up on disinformation and propaganda. And it's, Meta's rolling out their AI creators right now, which are like fake people to tell us what they think about whatever. Elon's just turned X into a full cesspool. The Trump administration is treating anyone who won't kiss the ring as an enemy of the state, including media. So I'm nervous about that, because you've got Trump's nominee to be head of the FBI saying he wants to prosecute the press and political enemies, So I wonder how we're supposed to find this reality-based ecosystem if we know, first of all, it's going to be skewed the way it is now, but supersized. And then we know our next government will simply change the narrative to fit the reality they prefer. What do you do with a government who doesn't care if they lie or if they're caught in a lie, who actively uses lies to benefit themselves? If the crime rates go up, they can just stop gathering the data or say it's gone down. If they don't want to deal with the climate crisis, they're like, great, we'll defund NOAA and we'll get rid of the EPA and we won't tell people that it's getting worse, right? Stop reporting the facts altogether, make up numbers, ignore factual reality. The migrant numbers are down, the border's closed now. No one was killed in that roundup that you saw on TV, even though people were. I'm not sure what we're supposed to do with that. And that concerns me. Historically, I'm sure you've seen the lying press before. I'm sure you've seen propagandists and authoritarians in history that have used information against people. What do we do when it's being used against us? This episode of the Politics Girl podcast is brought to you by Wild Grain. You might have heard me talk about Wild Grain over the holidays. Wild Grain is the first bake from frozen subscription box for artisanal breads, pastries, and pastas. Wild Grain boxes are fully customizable, so in addition to their classic variety box, they have a gluten-free box and a 100% vegan plant-based box. Best of all, they take the hassle out of baking, since all the items bake from frozen in 25 minutes or less. These boxes are amazing. We made croissants over the holidays, cookies, we had a baguette with our pasta, just fresh baked goods from the freezer to the table. And when I did have to bake a coffee cake in Toronto, me and the kitchen were literally covered in flour. So it was such a treat to have fresh baked goods without the mess. So are you ready to bring all your favorite carbs right to your doorstep? Be sure to check out Wild Grain to begin building your own box of artisanal breads, pastas, and pastries. For limited time, Wild Grain is offering our listeners $30 off their first box, plus free croissants in every box when you go to wildgrain.com/politicsgirl to start your subscription. Yep, you heard me. That's free croissants in every box and $30 off your first box when you go to wildgrain.com/politicsgirl. That's wildgrain.com/politicsgirl, or you can use the promo code politicsgirl at checkout. The start of the new year is the perfect time to get organized, set goals, and prioritize what matters most. With the chaos that's happening around us, one of my top priorities is going to be our financial wellness. And one of the ways to get a hold of that is by using Rocket Money. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that helps find and cancel your unwanted subscriptions, monitors your spending, and helps lower your bills so you can grow your savings. Rocket Money shows you all of your subscriptions in one place and helps easily cancel the ones you forgot you were paying for. Rocket Money also pulls together all of your spending across different accounts so you can clearly track your habits and see where you can cut back. You know when you sign up for something and then you forget about it after the trial and then you're charged month after month after month? Yeah, we do that a lot. In fact, 85% of people have at least one paid subscription going unused each month. But with Rocket Money, you can see all your subscriptions in one place and just cancel the ones you're not using. A lot of people need this service, which is why Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions and saving members up to $740 a year when they use all of the app's premium features. So cancel your unwanted subscriptions and reach your financial goals faster with Rocket Money. Go to rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl today. That's rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. rocketmoney.com/politicsgirl. Here's the thing. My husband and I like to cook for our family at night. We like sitting down to dinner to eat together, and we like knowing that we're eating healthy food. However, we're also incredibly busy people, and sometimes we don't have time to make a whole meal, so we end up ordering in. That, or the fact that Sean and I both work from home, and we often don't have the time to make lunch. Enter Cook Unity. Cook Unity is the New York-based chef-to-consumer meal delivery service. The company partners with famous and talented chefs who craft restaurant-quality, heat-to-eat meals delivered straight to your door. The company features over 70 chefs and hundreds of freshly prepared meals that are ready in minutes. You can choose the menu by protein, by chef, by type of food, by dietary preference or requirement. The menus are updated weekly and new chefs are always joining the team, so your mealtime will never be boring. The whole process is effortless. You get to choose from hundreds of meals, and then there's no planning or cleanup. The meals are delivered fully cooked and will heat in as little as 5 minutes. It's a flexible, commitment-free subscription service, so you can skip deliveries or pause or cancel anytime. The chefs' names are ones you'll know from the Food Network and James Beard Award winners and acclaimed restaurateurs. And everything is made in small batches and sent fresh, not frozen, with humanely raised meat and organic ingredients where possible. So reset your routine with convenient, mouth-watering meals crafted with local ingredients by award-winning chefs. Go to cookunity.com/politicsgirl or enter the code politicsgirl before you check out for 50% off your first week. That's 50% off your first week by using the code politicsgirl or going to cookunity.com/politicsgirl. Thank you, Cook Unity, for choosing to support our show. What do we do when it's being used against us?
Well, listen, I'm an Americanist, and the best examples of that are from other countries. And I would answer in a couple of ways. I would answer by starting with Tbilisi right now. You know, people who are living in the country of Georgia are throwing off a government that had a very heavy hand in their country and who had that kind of a press there. And they exchanged real information and have risen up against that government. And they're in the streets all, and look at Syria. Look at Syria as well. But in the United States, we had in the late 19th century a press that very much kowtowed to one party or the other, and usually to the people of huge wealth, the people that Teddy Roosevelt would call in that era the malefactors of great wealth. And one of the things that interests me in this moment, and I think this is, like I say, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I also don't think the path is set. And one of the reasons I say that is because of the way that Americans reacted to the man who allegedly murdered Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare. Because one of the things that has always been an issue since the rise of the Reagan Republicans in the 1980s is that they managed to make people look the other way and not recognize that the policies they were putting in place were moving $50 trillion from the 90% of Americans to the top 1%. And whenever people sort of were starting to say, hey, wait a minute here, we're losing our training programs, we're losing our education, we're losing all this stuff, they would they would say, oh, well, that's communism, or look at these Black Americans doing this, and welfare queens and women who want abortions. I forget, what did Rush Limbaugh call them? Feminazis.
Feminazis, yeah.
And they managed to continue to get into press by building a bigger and bigger and bigger demon that said, look, we're stopping that person. Please don't look while we're picking your pocket. And it worked. It worked for a very long time. And I frankly was shocked at the American reaction to that CEO murder. Not that CEO murders are all, or any kind of a murder is unusual in the United States. We are a very violent country, always have been. But that there was such an outpouring of fury at the insurance industry and at people who benefited from that insurance industry. And that to me really suggested that there is an undercurrent of Americans who are MAGA Republicans, as well as people all the way through to the far progressive left, that are really upset about our economic system. Right at the moment that Trump is sitting there putting billionaires into office right and left, and whose presidency was bought by the richest man in the world. That's a game changer, or it could be a game changer. So there is that. And then in terms of the way that people managed the media in the period that looked very much like this in the late 19th century was the rise of new media. And we keep reading everywhere that the legacy press is dying and that people are canceling subscriptions and so on. What they're doing is they're going to much newer, more authentic media that they trust because it appears to be honest. And that's exactly what happened in the late 19th century when we got the rise of all kinds of new newspapers and all kinds of new ways of communicating that gave people a window into the way that the country was really working. And out of that, if you think about the late 19th century, in 1896, there's a really dramatic election in which the Republicans win with William McKinley, who is the big business candidate. And they say that everybody else who is running against him is a communist. No, a socialist is the word. Then it's a socialist, maybe a communist. They're anarchists. They're going to destroy America, the whole thing. 1896, McKinley wins. He's reelected in 1900 in a little bit of a funny election because there's just been the gold strikes in the Yukon. And that meant that a lot of money came into America. So the economy rebounded in a way it probably shouldn't have and wouldn't have without the gold strikes. But by 1912, so just 12 years later after that, all three major candidates running for a president in the United States were all progressive candidates. And it was in that election that a socialist did better than in any other election in American history. Eugene V. Debs got almost 1 million votes in that election. So in 12 years, you went from anybody who is a labor organizer, or anybody who wants to get the lead paint out of children's candies or stop them from throwing rotten meat into sausages and all that stuff is a communist, to I think we got to clean up this entire country. And I just am not convinced we can't do it again because listen, we have to move forward. You asked me at one point, how do we stay engaged? We do have to wake up tomorrow and do something. So our options are accepting somebody else dictating our lives to us, or insisting on retaining our agency and trying to make the world a better place. And given those two options, I think of listen, nobody wants to face what we're coming up to, but what are our options to do anything other than trying to make it better?
Yeah. There's a great cartoon from Garth Sherman who has a man who's standing underneath a sign that says, "Welcome to 2025, choose a door." And there's two doors, and one says, "Disengage and hope it turns out for you." And the other one says, "Fight for what's right." And the man is walking through the fight for what's right door. And I think that that's the choice, right? You can either ostrich or you can stand up for what's right. And I'm interested that you were struck as well by this fallout of the healthcare CEO being shot, because I do think that there was a sea shift there. And I do think something is happening. And I think that the way that people are reacting is fascinating, because they're not reacting the way we're being told to react, because the media is telling us that we should be, shocked that someone would walk up to someone in the middle of the street and shoot someone. And I know The Atlantic keeps pushing an article, and I love The Atlantic, but they keep pushing the same article like every 6 hours online that says celebrating a murderer and turning an accused killer into a sex symbol and cult hero and modern day Robin Hood is just an astonishing level of dehumanization, as if we don't live in the world where this CEO made billions of dollars a day by literally dehumanizing Americans and turning their lives into numbers on a spreadsheet, right? So not only does United Healthcare dehumanize their members who pay for health insurance so that when they get sick, they can be taken care of, the humans that used to review those claims were replaced by AI because the computers were better at denying claims. Honestly, the whole thing is dehumanizing. So I think it's so interesting that sort of the billionaire class mainstream media part, the people that own those things, are trying to push at us that we need to be outraged about this one man being shot, when people are like, people walk into our children's schools every day and kill 25 kids, and we're all like, oh, there's nothing we can do. You know what I mean? But we're going to do a full manhunt with FBI money and all the NYPD and everyone out for this one killer. And people are like, hold on. There was 10 other people killed within that same hour. Why aren't we looking for those murderers? I think it's interesting.
For me, the thing that really jumps out, and I am not at all defending any murders ever.
Of course not. No.
But the fact that, and it was a very deliberate effect of the Republican Party, the fact that we did not respond to Sandy Hook, which was the place where the children were murdered.
In kindergarten.
I don't think you can make a big claim about an adult being shot in the way he was without sort of saying, why aren't we talking as passionately about those kindergartners?
Yeah.
Again, who knows what's going to happen? But if you think about how angry the old MAGA is at the billionaires and how disillusioned many of them seem to be by the fact, and, I've been watching right-wing Twitter and to some degree True Social recently.
Good for you. Very brave.
And but they're really angry. They feel like they were used. They say, you got our vote, and lots of profanity, and now they're being tossed overboard. If they lose interest in MAGA, I'm not suggesting that suddenly they become, Eisenhower, but that they seem to me to be perhaps accessible to those people like, maybe Sherrod Brown, who was talking about, we got to protect workers from the very wealthy, and who actually picked up a lot more votes in Ohio in 2024 than Harrison Walz did, or like John Tester, who picked up a lot more votes in Montana than Harrison Walz did. There's a lot of malleability, I think, over issues of class now that could once again go back and trump issues of race and culture the way that they did in the late 19th century. Same shift happened back then.
Yeah, well, I think race and culture have been used deliberately to make sure we don't pay attention to the class warfare that has been happening for so long. It's like if you can, what's that old expression? If you can convince the lowest white man to hate the lowest black man, you won't notice that their pocket is being picked, right? I mean, that's what's being happened for forever. And I feel like the billionaire class is almost nervous about the response, that us normies aren't buying what they're selling anymore. And Peter Thiel was visibly rattled after that event where Luigi killed the CEO, and he could barely string together a coherent sentence. And the man is very eloquent. And he basically said, violence isn't the answer. We need to be having a conversation, as if people haven't been trying to have a conversation about healthcare for years. And, you look at someone like Elon Musk, he literally seems to be wearing one of his children as a human shield at every event he's at these days. He's got that kid in his shoulders everywhere. It doesn't make any sense unless you think, well, I'll get less likely to be shot if I'm wearing this child around my neck.
I never thought of that. Wow.
I'm telling you, if you don't think it's weird, now he's been wearing that kid since that shooting. It is the most bizarre thing. But I think historically, what you're talking about is basically like what was coming out of the Gilded Age, where you could treat your workers however you wanted. You could treat women however you wanted. You could have your entire shirt factory burned down and be like, build a new shirt factory, get new workers. Like, they don't matter. And I think eventually people they catch on. And they say, we don't like the conditions we're living in. And it also goes with, you were saying, the rise of new media. But back then in the early 1900s, it was the rise of investigative journalism and taking photographs inside of these meat factories and showing the people what it looked like. And it would outrage people. It was a huge shift in what the public could see, what they were aware of. And I think it's beholden on people like you and I who are out here doing independent work to make sure people still get the right information, which I think is so great that so many people follow Letters from American, your Substack, and I hope more people will, because you're getting real information within the context of how we sit here in history.
I do worry that it'll be hard for me to do my job, because what I do the federal government mostly, and I do rely on government statistics, on government reports, and the Biden administration was very, very good about transparency. I'm very concerned that I'm not going to be able to continue to do it at that level. I will say that one of the things that, if you look at the collapse or apparent collapse of legacy media, that doesn't get as much attention is that you do have a lot of new local newspapers springing up. New local podcasts, new ways for people to get local information into these news deserts. Because, at the end of the day, my brother's an educator. And he always says, listen, humans are wired to learn, because if you didn't learn, you'd get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. So we're wired to learn. The question is, what are we learning? And the people who care about a reality-based community, I think, have assumed that people would find that reality, when in fact, when it's just easier to turn on the TV or to listen to a long podcast that that makes you outraged, that people turn there. Now, one of the interesting things that one of the people who studies disinformation has discovered is that there's nothing that makes people engage more with media than outrage, except inspiration. Inspiration also makes people engage with media. Those two both are equally attractive to people. And we always talk about how, fear sells and hatred sells and outrage sells, which it totally does. If you watch Facebook, for example, you will see they constantly are trying to gin up outrage, constantly. But also think about how people react to inspiration, and they do a very similar thing. And I thought that was a really interesting observation in terms of reaching people who otherwise have been beyond the reach of that reality-based community.
Yeah, you're right. It's the people are, they're clicking hard on things that make them outraged, but they also click hard on like the saving the dog from the river in the stories. You know what I mean? Like when humans come together and do something good and pull the baby elephant out and give it back to its mummy elephant. People love that stuff. They want to see good things happening, and we could give them more of that. Before you go, as we come up on this inauguration, what do you think Biden should be doing in these last days? Should we be pushing for amnesty for anyone Trump is threatened? Should we be looking at mass pardons for people like Cassidy Hutchinson, who doesn't have the protections of the speech and debate clause like someone like Liz Cheney will be? Should we be ratifying the Equal Rights Amendment? What are the kind of things you think we should be doing in these last days before this switch over to, like you said, you're not sure if you're going to even get the right information with the next administration?
Personally, I wish we had more information easily available on things like missteps that the previous Trump administration made with foreign governments. I would like to, because I want that material that we can carry forward to the public. And, things like I would really like to see the report from Jack Smith about the classified documents that got taken down to Mar-a-Lago, things that probably won't get acted on legally, but people in America still own the government, and they might like to know those things. That's what I would like to see. There are problems with the idea, for example, of these blanket pardons, because there is not always, but usually in American history, a presumption that if you accept a pardon, you committed a crime. You don't accept a pardon if you didn't commit a crime. And that's not, there's a lot of wiggle room in that. But one of the reasons, and Biden answered this to a reporter last night, lawyers have said you don't need to pardon these people because they didn't commit a crime. And it becomes sort of murky if you pardon some people and they accept a pardon, then if other people don't get a pardon, did they commit a crime? So you can see not wanting to touch that. The ERA is a little bit more complicated because, as you know, when they put forward this version of the ERA, Congress put a deadline on when the states had to ratify it by. And a number of them did not make the deadline. And while we were waiting for those to do it, a number of other states rescinded their ratification of it. So there are legal challenges to it. And the National Archivist, who's actually a pretty important figure in the way we do laws and amendments to constitutions and counting of electoral votes, said, I do not have the authority to do this because some of it happened after the date. Now, that being said, Senator Kristen Gillibrand from New York has said, forget it. Go ahead and list it anyway, and then make Republicans say no.
Yeah, make them justify it in Congress, make them justify it even in court. You know what I mean? Make them say women don't have equal rights to men in this country. Make them make the argument. I kind of agree with Senator Gillibrand on that, because that is how the Republicans would play it. That is how they got the Supreme Court. That is how they won Congress through gerrymandering. They said, we're going to make these changes and then you fight us on it. And we kept losing. So in this case, I think the women of America deserve at least a shot at having equal rights, even if it's going to be fought. At least allow it to be fought in broad daylight, where you see Republicans fighting against women having equal rights going into an administration that is clearly anti-woman.
Yeah, this will be the first. There'll be fewer women in the House this year than there were last, and there will not be any women in charge of House committees. That being said, I agree with you on that, but I'm going to push it a little bit further and say, even if Biden doesn't do that, and I don't know what he's going to do. He's given very contradictory signals, but, again, you don't know what's going to happen in the future. I think that's a point that women really have to be making going forward, is that there's obviously a huge element of misogyny in the Republican Party. There's this attempt to write women out of American history, to write us out of the current moment, to make it in some states that women can't cross state lines out of fear that they'll obtain abortion care in other states. I mean, that's a really scary thing. And this is a place that I would really suggest that people should exercise their agency and say, no, women really make up a little bit more than half of the number of people in the United States. And you must take us seriously and you must treat us equally. Because as we know from many countries, once women's rights start to slide away, everybody's rights start to slide away. The economy starts to tank. Nothing goes in a good direction. And that, I think, is going to be a major fight in the next 4 years.
Yeah, I agree with that. Well, from one woman to another, let's get loud about that. Thank you so much for joining us today, Heather. Please tell people how they can follow your amazing work moving forward, because they really do need you.
Well, I'm on Substack with Letters from an American. I also posted on Facebook. They're always free, by the way. I do webcasts on Facebook, and I will be expanding in 2025 as well. Hoping to do more of this with people like you. And while we're at it, happy 2025. Let's make it a good one.
Happy 2025. Let us try very hard to make it a good one. That is a very hopeful way of looking at it. I'm going to go with you on that. Thank you, Heather.
Thanks for having me.
So that was Heather Cox Richardson reminding us that we don't know the future is not going to be good, that we can't assume anything because we don't know what's going to happen. We know the next administration's policies and plans are designed to hurt people, but we don't actually know how that's going to play out. Look at the reaction to the CEO shooting. People from all sides of the political spectrum were outraged, but not at the murderer as expected, but at insurance companies and American healthcare, which was unexpected. That's an interesting development that's worth watching. As Heather says, keep your eyes on the patterns, the big trends. Don't overwhelm yourself with every little slight, because the actions of this next group are going to be designed to exhaust us and make us tune out. We need to stay in. We just need to do it in manageable chunks. I want to thank Heather for joining us today, and you for caring enough about America to be here. Remember that outrage might capture our attention, but so does inspiration. So let's try to add more of that second one to the mix. Until next week, PG out. Before you go, I just want to say, if you're a premium member of this podcast, thank you. And if you're not a member, please consider supporting my work. As Heather said, the rise of new media is essential in this political landscape. We need to support the newer, more authentic voices that will give us the truth amidst the for-profit propaganda. We know the mainstream media is not going to be a reliable source of information going into this next phase of American politics, and the right-wing extremists are already at an advantage because their side invested in their messaging for so many years. So if you aren't a member of PoliticsGirl Premium, please consider going to PoliticsGirl.com and signing up. The beauty of supporting me is that you will get this podcast ad-free, along with all my short rants sent directly to your inbox. So even if my work is silenced on social media, you will still get access to the truth. There's a link to sign up in the bio of this episode, but also on PoliticsGirl.com. Thank you again for all your time and support. The Politics Girl podcast is written and performed by me, Lee McGowan, in partnership with the Meidas Media Network, and produced and edited by Happy Warrior Entertainment. All rights reserved.